So, Srini, thank you so much for joining me today, Silicon Heartland Sessions. This is an opportunity for us to highlight the great leaders in the Silicon Heartland. We've got a very, very special community, and it's because of leaders like you.
Thanks.
You are the president, AI, and sustainability, and CTO at Rackspace.
Yeah, that's correct. It's kind of the and it's the way I describe myself. Sean is I'm the strong safety, right? For a Rackspace. So, what
There
position
we
do I
go.
play? Strong safety, right? So make sure nothing
I
slips
love it.
through.
There you go. I love your humility too, man. Many people would aspire to being like the quarterback, but something to be said for those that really do the heavy lifting. And I'm going to get myself in trouble with all of the football fans out there, so I won't say too much. So thanks so much for joining today. Let's
Oh,
jump
thank you
right
so
in.
much. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
do
yeah.
that.
My pleasure, man. So let's talk a bit about your personal and professional development. Starting with kind of like your keys to success. Let's just jump right in. So could you share some of the most valuable lessons or practices that have propelled your success? And you mentioned to me before the podcast, one of your favorite books is Jim Collins, his book Good to Great.
Mhm.
I'm curious, how do the concepts from good to great sort of align to your own lessons that you've learned in your life experience?
Well, Sean, first of all, thank you for your kind words at the start, and I'm so glad that we've got like a CTO, a really accomplished CTO like you, taking on the mantle of doing this podcast because it's always pretty cool to talk to peers, right? And
Thank you.
essentially, just have a conversation, right? And
Yeah.
so I appreciate you doing the Silicon Heartland because I tend to agree with you. I think we've got some phenomenal tech leaders here, and you've been
Oh
highlighting
yeah.
them over your series. But I'm honored to be here, right? So let's jump into your question. I think, look, if I go back in my career, the one thing that has stayed common, Rick, and by the way, this is my 39th year I've been in the technology industry, 39 years. If there's one thing that has stayed constant all through the 39 years has been I have loved technology. I just absolutely I'm an early adopter. I've got everything from the Apple Vision stuff to the Rabbit AI device and everything else sitting out here. So
Wow.
it's like something comes out, I'm just wasting money or going out and trying it out because it's I think it's that basic curiosity that's kind of helped me all through. I've always loved doing that. That kind of propels my learning and others. And so I think that thread, I can say that I just turned 60. It hasn't changed from the day I was like 22, 23 to now. Like it hasn't really changed. So
That's
that's
amazing.
that's that's been very helpful. However, one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn through my journey was when I left IBM and joined Nationwide in the early 2000s, right in the 2001, in fact. And I still remember Mike Keller was a CIO at that time at Nationwide,
Hmm.
and he, when I came
Yep.
in, Mike and I had worked together at IBM, and he knew me as an expert technologist, right? So when he came in, he said, "Srini, I have no doubt that you're going to help Nationwide. The big lesson you're going to have to learn is how do you get uh, uh, how do you get an army to follow you because whatever you've done at IBM, you may have led a small team, but think of those as the special forces, right? People who are actually they're trained
Right.
in like more experts like you. But here, you're actually coming in, and it's no slight against them, but the technology competence level is not the same as an expert, right? So how do you actually win the hearts and minds of people and how do you build something that is sustainable is something that Mike taught me right up front, right? And I think that
Right.
switch back in the early 2000s is probably the biggest lesson and change that I've had to go through in my career because it wasn't easy. I struggled for the first 2 years at Nationwide because you're running at 100 miles an hour, and as an organization that whose primary business is not technology, an insurance company moves at a different pace. And
Very
so
true.
being able to understand how do you adjust your pace so that you don't kind of slow down completely, but how do you bring the overall organization around has been a critical learning. And that's
That's
where the
incredible.
whole Jim Collins book comes in, right? In Good to Great, he talks about the flywheel concept, right? And the flywheel is essentially, if you kind of think about a flywheel that's a mile wide and a mile high and a ton, right? Like it takes you a long time to get it to go around one circle. But once you've been able to get that moving in the right direction, inertia takes
Momentum
over
takes
and you
over.
start
Yes.
making that piece. That flywheel concept is absolutely something that I'm sure the guys at Rackspace who work for me are probably smiling to themselves listening to this because day two I show up like I got a CTO flywheel, right? And
Right.
then we're speeding up the AI startup. I've got an AI flywheel, right? So, but it's fundamentally how do you kind of bring together a team towards a common goal, and how do you set it up so that it's systematic, right? Not a one
Hmm.
time thing to go through it. So that's been a huge lesson for me.
That's incredible. So, kind of going back to your transition from IBM to Nationwide, and you said this really, really interesting. This really resonated with me. In one respect, it's easier to lead a team of special forces because
Yeah.
they're seasoned professionals. They know what they're doing. They know the
Hmm.
mission. You don't have to explain it to them. It's different, and then changing to this concept where you have to inspire the masses to
Hmm.
follow you is a big deal. And that flyweight concept really resonates with me as well. What
Yeah.
it says to me is in any of these initiatives, you know, and all the important things that we do in life, are born out of struggle, because what that
Hmm.
means is we're trying to do something really, really difficult.
Right.
And with this flyweight mechanism, or this process is, at least to me, the way I think of it is start small, start to gain momentum, start moving the wheel a little
Hmm.
bit at a time, and over time it'll gradually increase in speed.
Yeah.
So thinking about that, one of the other key words that you mentioned was struggle.
Hmm.
So reflecting back in your career, were there any missteps that you've encountered, and what have you learned from them? I know you're an avid reader, and I know you're
Yeah.
an avid podcast listener as well. And one of the concepts that a lot of the thought leaders in technology and in business talk about, this concept of failing forward. And that
Hmm.
certainly, at least for me, resonates with this whole concept of a flyweight. So even when you make a mistake,
Hmm.
how do you recover from that, especially
Yeah.
when the stakes are so high?
Yeah. Um, yeah, as far as mistakes go, Sean, I've made more than my share of mistakes, right? So I absolutely do. Um, even if I just go back to the same time period I just told you about, just walking in from IBM into Nationwide, right? Nationwide is a phenomenal company. I just absolutely love the leaders there, the culture that's been built, and others. But I didn't appreciate it when I came in, right? I did not
Hmm.
appreciate it when you came in because you're coming in um, from an organization that's more technology centric than others. And this example I gave you about special forces versus army is very real, because it's in an army you get people trained by different drill sergeants and others, and their techniques may not be exactly the same in others. Versus
Right.
in special forces, you're trained to do something and do it very well. You can do it with your
Right.
eyes closed. Right. So the leadership things that you expect. So you walk in a situation like this, and what I end up doing is, how do you not understand this stuff? This is just so, and the people aspect of it, I probably frayed a bunch of relationships in the first 6 months that I had to go and consciously rebuild. Because I was there for 11, 12 years. So it wasn't like, so you either had an option to, when you start seeing the organization push back on your style and how to drive that stuff, you have two paths, like either learn from it and then adapt to the organization, or
Hmm.
leave, right? And not going to leave, right? Like that's not in my DNA. So I think it was
Right.
really helpful. It is absolutely. I was lucky to have Mike Keller as my mentor at that point in time, because he was constantly, he would uh, urged me to kind of keep pushing, right? He said, like, we need
Right.
that, keep pushing. However, here's a better way to think about it. Here's a different way to do that piece. So I think part of that lesson learned for me from there was, how do you surround yourself with people that you can actually go and have these conversations, right?
Right.
So meaning, once you get to a certain level, Sean, you know this, people are not going to tell you what they actually think, right? How do you
Right.
kind of create your own personal board of directors that
Hmm.
will kind of look at it and go like, dude, don't get too full of yourself, right?
Very
or
true.
or in other places, other times, like, don't be too hard on yourself, right?
Hmm.
Because this has
Yeah.
happened. I've gone through it as well. So I think having that has been very helpful.
Yeah.
We do this naturally in technology, right? We've got our own set of subject matter experts, and if you have a problem with networking, as an example, you know who to call, right? And
Hmm.
you'll do that piece. We should
Well,
be doing that. We should be doing that with team and leadership and other types of things as well, because you need that honest, candid board of directors, as a personal board of directors, that's
I
going to
agree
help
with you.
you kind of learn from your mistakes.
I agree with you. The thing that you said that really resonated with me was, you know, adaptation,
Mhm.
adapting, and the way I see it is obviously, you're bringing your own style, you're bringing your own true authentic
Yeah.
self to this role. And there has to be a balance. I mean, you can't lose yourself. You can't change your leadership style and so forth. Like you said, there is that decision you have to make. Am I either
Mhm.
going to adapt or am I going to leave? I'm not going to leave. I'm going to adapt.
Mhm.
But adapt doesn't mean giving up yourself. It means finding the right balance.
Yeah.
And to your point, the thing that really resonates with me is um, the key ingredient. It sounds to me for you is you know mentors,
Mhm.
talking with other folks, getting
Mhm.
their input.
Yeah. I'll tell you, like, since we're Silicon Heartland, people will probably recognize the names, right? I have people like Mike Keller that I go to very often. He doesn't live in Columbus anymore, but I'm on the phone with him once every month. Still,
Are you? That.
I am on. I have lunch with Dwight Smith, who you also probably know, right? Sophisticated
Hmm.
system local. He's been here for 35 plus years.
I
Amazing
know.
human
Yeah, I
being.
know him very well. Hmm.
And so having people like that around you, always you find something that is admirable in them. And I may never get to be a humanitarian like Dwight is, or a amazing people leader like Mike Keller was, but you can always keep trying, right? Continuous improvement. That's the whole. Um, it's the
Well,
whole. That's kind of what keeps you going, right? If you're
very true.
stable and static, you're not going to learn.
Yeah, and then I would presume you're also a mentor for others as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's the other one. Again, when people do ask me for it, I tend to build relationships with people who've been with me for a long period of time, right? Like, feel comfortable and then come to me. I do have what you would call mentoring relationship, which is where somebody's very specifically looking to build a particular skill, and then you meet with them to kind of help them think through it.
Hmm.
But in terms of career mentors, like, people that I mentor through their career, there's the 4 or 5 people that I spend time with, right, and make sure that it's there. And I'm very proud of the fact that they're all very accomplished leaders in themselves, right? And they still feel like they want to pick up the phone and call me.
Heck yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So before we started recording, we were talking about your if you were to choose a theme song for your life, and you mentioned Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World,"
Yeah.
and which, to be honest with you, it doesn't surprise me. I know how passionate you are about social causes and sustainability and responsible AI and things like that. As you mentioned, just as equally as you are, it feels to me as passionate as you are about
Yeah.
technology and the fact that after all of these years, 37 years, I think, or 39
37.
years,
Yeah.
after all that time, you're still just as passionate about technology, but I get the sense you're also equally passionate about the environment, sustainability, social causes. I'm just curious, given that as a backdrop,
Mhm.
can you share any personal accomplishments that you're particularly proud of and that are meaningful to you?
Wow. Really, one of the things that I've tried not to do is to kind of go spend more time on thinking about what did I accomplish, right? But I can tell you, like, the things that give me satisfaction is, I like, after my nationwide days, I moved to the Bay Area and then just came back in 2021 to Columbus, right?
Yep.
So I came to this country in 1987. So it's, 37 years, 37, 38 years, and lived most of my time in the US in Columbus, Ohio. Right. So this is a place that I've known and others. So
Right.
um,
Hmm.
the accomplishments, like, so at the time and time, so let me take an example. Like, we built out what was the first agile application development center that was 100% agile, but also got CMM level 3 certified, right? And
Wow.
what was
Heck
cool
yeah.
about it was in 2000, that was in 2008, right? That wasn't in 2023 or 2024. That was in 2008. 650, 700 people in the dev center within nationwide. While at that point in time, that felt like a huge accomplishment. What really was a better accomplishment is I come back from the Bay Area now, and I'd be like, having dinner somewhere or meeting like at a Cloud Nirvana conference or something like that, and
Hmm.
someone walks over and says, like, Srini, do you remember me? And I'm going, like, honestly, it's not that you're trying to be this. No, I don't. Right? And they say, like, look, you gave me my first start as a iteration manager on this line in the dev center, and that's actually the first time I got to learn this, and this is what's created my career. And then you turn around and say, okay, so what are you doing now? And they'll say, well, I'm running the entire thing for Huntington Bank, right? Like, the Agile thing for Huntington or for Cardinal Health or
Right.
one of those guys.
Oh,
And then you go, like, wow, that impact. I'm very happy for them, and I'm very happy that, like, I had a small part to play in getting those things done. Because I think a big part of a lot of these things is you can give people the opportunity, you can kind of drive that, but the majority of the effort comes from from the individual, right? They've got to
right.
kind of own it. So most of the times it's about, like, thank you for mentioning me, but you got there because of what you did, right? And I think that sense of accomplishment that you get when somebody else has achieved something, right? And I think Scott Sanders, one of the guys who works for me, came back and said, like, Srini, do you realize that there are 24 people that worked in your teams over the last 20 years who are now CIOs in their own right? And you
That's
go, wow, like,
incredible.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's it's what they did, right? And to me, the most fulfilling thing, Sean, is, like, again, it comes, I guess, with age, is when just somebody comes in and just, they don't even have to thank me, but just say something like that, saying, "Hey,
Hmm.
do you realize
The
that I got to start there?"
and the
That
influence that you
starts
had
to
on
say, like,
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
you made a difference in somebody's life.
Hell
That's
yeah.
it.
That's incredible. Speaking of making a difference, I know, you're obviously very passionate about the community and the people in your orbit and the influence that you have on them. I know you're very passionate about the environment as well. What social issues are you deeply passionate about and actively involved in?
Yeah. Um, Another great question. Two issues are personal to me, right? Number one, I think in the world that we live in, no child should go hungry, never, ever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like, that's human beings are, especially human children require a lot of nurturing before they are independent and on their own, right? We're
right,
not like other mammals, like that, maybe 6 months or 8 months and they're independent. This is
right.
we're very dependent, and I think it's a crime that you have kids going hungry while, like, you got, these ultra rich and ultra this thing who are buying out, like, $50 million, $250 million yachts and going around in that space. Again, I'm not advocating for any social thing. I'm just saying, um, in a world that you can actually have people be that successful, we've got to
Hmm.
be able to find a way to kind of make sure that no child can go hungry. So I want to be very clear that this is not class warfare or something. It's just, if
Right.
you're able to do all those
Well,
great things, you should be able to do this, right? And
hmm.
and and so that's something you do that. And then the second part of it comes down to, I am. I've got two amazing daughters who are very successful in their own right. Like my wife was a very successful professional, but I've had a chance to firsthand see the discrepancies, the disadvantages that women face in the work environment. Right?
Right.
They're stereotyped into certain roles. Like if they have to take maternity leave to come back in, they kind of take a few steps back in the career. They're expected to have a style that matches men, right? Which is I just don't get it, right? When you're basically saying, you know, you can see it right from the younger school days. Like kids, boys are actually pretty boisterous. They're very vocal and other types of things. And it's like in order for you to succeed in corporate America, you got to behave like a boy. And it's like, why? Right? That doesn't actually
I'm with
tie
you.
into that. So the second component of it for me is has always been education and mentoring of women leaders. Right, that
Right.
is top priority for me. I think the more people that we can help in that space, you start creating an environment. And I know I kind of skipped past that question. You asked me about what a wonderful world, right? Like, clearly, like as an old guy, you had to pick an old song, but really, what resonates with me about that, what resonates with me about that song is the optimistic view of the world. It's a glass half full version of the world, right? What a wonderful world! Like,
Heck
I
yeah.
see skies blue, and it's when you kind of think through that piece, they're not talking about it, the world filled with plastic and skies are smokestacks and others. Like you could have a very dark view of the world. I think
Very
the
true.
positive view of the world is important because it is not taking a Pollyanna-ish approach that says like, no, these are all don't exist. There's so much positive in the world that you can actually kind of build on it and drive it. And if you adopt that type of philosophy to it, you're always going to fall forward. You're going to make mistakes, but you're going to fall forward. Right? But if you
Right.
if you take that negative, like somebody did this to me, or this, I've got bad luck. Why did it happen? Or start focusing on the negative, you go into
Right.
that negative spiral, which is not useful, whether in personal life or in the professional space.
I love your optimism. I love, obviously there is a lot of darkness in the world, but to your
Yeah.
point, the way that you counteract that is by engaging,
Hmm.
involving yourself in causes that help to ensure that no child will go hungry,
Yeah.
involving yourself in causes that help to empower women and help to make sure that they have equal footing
Hmm.
in the workforce and in the world. I'm with you. I've got two daughters myself, and I feel very proud and blessed that my wife and I have raised two very strong, independent
Yeah.
young women. And I agree with you. I'll join you hand in hand in those efforts. So
Yeah.
I think that's
Excellent.
wonderful. To your point, though, I mean, having that worldview, looking through that lens of optimism, and knowing that I've got an opportunity, you've got an opportunity to make a difference in the things that you care for
Hmm.
is really meaningful.
Yeah.
That very much resonates with me. And to me, that starts to really sort of weave into this concept, the concept of leadership, not just in tech, not just in business, but in the community
Yeah.
as well. And I know you're a passionate and very actively involved leader in the community. You're a world traveler, very successful businessman, technology executive. So when you think about the qualities that define a transformative leader in
Hmm.
today's tech landscape, what are those core qualities for you? And you've talked a lot about in the past. We've talked a lot about Simon Sinek. We share a similar enjoyment of his podcasts and his books and so forth. So when you think about the transformative leaders today, how do you see those qualities that Simon Sinek teaches about in
Yeah.
his books and so forth,
Yeah.
coming to sort of fruition for you?
It's again another great question. Like, look, for me, Simon Sinek start with the why, and transformative leadership are one and the same. Right? Transformative leadership, by the way, is a discipline that's studied for a very long period of time, and where they talk about how transformative leaders are able to set a vision and motivate people to get there, and others. And there's a whole field of study around transformative leadership. Uh, what Simon Sinek did, like when I first saw his Golden Triangle speech, right, like it just resonated with me right away, because it's kind of like people follow you because of the why, right? Like it's
Right.
who you are and why you're doing it, as opposed to what you do and other things. And that was important to me, because a big part of transformative leadership is setting the context, right? And explaining to the organization, explaining to your team as to why is important. I can still tell, like, when you have the really ambitious types on the team, right? Like they're sitting there going, like, hey, why is this old guy like still talking for 20 minutes about the context? And it's like, you won't understand it now, but you'll understand it at some point in time, because the
Right.
context is important. Why is it important to the organization is very critical. Why are we doing this is very important. And the same way, why is it important to me personally as a leader? It also has to come through. So I kind of put that into the world, into that umbrella of context, and that's pretty important.
I love it.
Because once you understand the context under which you're asking people to do, I think most people I've seen go the extra mile, right? Because they now have a common cause to go do. Like as an example, I have a in our IT organization, we had about 8,000 plus devices across the board. And we said, like, look, I want to get to under 1,000 in 15 months, and explained why, like in terms of why is it important to do it. It's not any vanity thing, but it's like, look, every time Microsoft releases a patch, a patch Tuesdays, you're patching 1,000 plus servers, right? Or
Right.
every time something like the CrowdStrike thing from last week happens, like you're going after a lot of things, right? And when you do not have to do that, like, here's the free time you get to do innovative things and others. When you start explaining the context, most people get it, but then they go, okay, so let's go on that mission. And we are, I'm telling you, by November of this year, Justin Cuss, who works for me, who runs infrastructure, will have us under 800 servers, right? By that time, like from as many that we started. He dropped an
Right.
extra zero on that front. But that's, if you can think about how much was done in 15 months, that from a technical feat standpoint, you understand running things in production, doing that is not easy, right? But you
100%.
actually needed people to buy into the why to do that piece. And I just used the technology example, but every single time, right? Like I think buying into the why is very important, and I think Simon Sinek's Golden Triangle has been great, and it's so much ingrained in me that um, many times, like with boards and other senior execs,
Hmm.
they're all still talking what, right? What are you gonna like? What
100%.
offerings am I gonna put out from an AI standpoint? What am I gonna do this thing? What deals are we trying to close and others? Like I tend to be the guy who focuses a lot more on the why and the how.
Right.
Why am I doing it? And how am I going to do that? Because that's the process component of it that we talked about earlier, right?
Right.
That flywheel part that I said mentioned. If you can do the why and the how, then you can implement something that's sustainable. The what will happen, right? It's not that it's not
Yep.
important, but if you just focus on the what, you may put superhuman efforts and get it done one time. But then you lose the person, or the team disbands and goes on to other projects and others. You can't. The whole success is not replicated, right?
I
And it's
totally
not
agree.
sustainable in the long run. So I think
Yeah.
that's the key thing. I think the other part of this is like, look, there are three skills that have been very important to me as a leader. Right? The first one I had to learn. I'll have to say, like, I had to learn again. I credit Keller for this. Is truly listening so that you can empathize with people. Truly listening,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Not just the I need to do this because I got to do the one on one, right? Like so it's absolutely that empathy is at this. And what helps with empathy is curiosity, right? Like, so you've got to be able to kind of really
Yep.
listen, and that curiosity is the second skill that I think is very critical. And then, like, what that does is, if you have those two skills, then truly engaging with a growth mindset is important. And again, tying it back to the theme song you asked about, "What a Wonderful World," like, it's a growth mindset song, right? It's not a theory of constraints or any of those things that you look at. In my mind, that's a growth mindset song, because
I love
uh,
it.
all of us have resource constraints. All of us have challenges. The
Yep.
question is, can you still solve that problem with a very, very different approach than this piece? But I think those three things, for me personally, have been very important, because I
Hmm.
can take anything. I can take, we just launched, this, we launched Fair about a year and a half ago, and we've done more than 50 engagements. It's been very successful. And
Hmm.
somebody asked me how. It's kind of like, look, I started with the why. Why are we doing this piece? Because there's a lot of bad things going on with AI, but we want to do it because we want to make sure that AI has got tremendous potential, glass half full version of it, tremendous
Yep.
potential. But unless you have somebody leading the charge on the good guys side with responsible AI, that's not going to
Right.
happen. So we started with the whole responsible AI construct and then worked through it. And then the curiosity comes down to, okay, let's just understand, like, whether it's the good guys or the bad guys, let's understand what they're doing. Because again, even if it's something that, deep fakes or something else that are coming, are there any bright sides to it? How do you actually, are you going to always be playing defense, or is there a flip side to it? All of those other
Right.
pieces that you start thinking about, that's the curiosity. And then the growth mindset is like, absolutely, like, when you think about it from an organization standpoint, we're much smaller than the big guys. Like, you name your
Right.
own personal, we're much smaller than an IBM, Accenture, any of these other guys. But it's like, uh, I could use that as an excuse not to do stuff, or I could use a growth mindset to go try to compete in that space. And I think that
Right.
I use that as an example because those are my three critical skills that I've used over and over again throughout my career. And it's something that I keep urging my daughters to kind of go learn, be curious,
There you go.
listen, right? And then, yeah.
I love it. The word that comes to my mind when as you've been talking, is inspire. When you talk about setting the context and helping the organization see the why,
Hmm.
not only
Hmm.
that, but you're taking the time to meet with them individually, to listen to them, to
Yeah.
empathize, to help foster this growth mindset. I start thinking, wow, when you're talking about these really difficult things, like I can't even imagine how challenging as it was. First of all, just to make the case to go out
Yeah.
and start Fair. But then to, over the course of that 18 months, the 50 engagements you've done and the amazing work that you've done, that comes from hard work. And that
Hmm.
hard work, to your point, comes from a workforce that sees the why, is
Yeah.
inspired to come every day and to really pour their creative energy into it, to really pour themselves into the endeavor that and the vision that you've laid out for them. When you think about, it's one thing to set the stage and to help set the context, help folks see the why, but you have to sustain that over time. And over time, I have to imagine there's lots of really, really difficult decisions that you have to make. How do you approach making challenging decisions when you're under pressure? You've talked about we've talked about Steve Jobs, and he before he passed away and everything, he espoused this notion of living before you die.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, how did his legacy and
Yeah.
his and the wisdom that he gave to us, how has that influenced your decision making process, especially in high stake environments?
Yeah. There's a great example of, like, and I know people have different views of Steve Jobs and others, but when you kind of think about the genius of how he thought about the world, like, hey, if you're going to do something, go make a dent in the universe, right? Like, it's not like, not tinker around with this stuff. Like, let's go at it. That bold vision is something that he did. This whole live before you die. If people haven't watched it, this one, just go to TED Talks and watch his commencement
It's incredible.
speech at Stanford, and then send me a note if you're not inspired, right? It's hard not to be inspired by listening to that. And that
Yeah.
what I take away from that, though, Sean, is and I told you about it. I used a football analogy at the start. Here's a baseball analogy, right? If you've got 10 times at bat and you don't swing, you know what your average is going to be, right? If you do take
Very true.
educated swings, even if you hit only four out of it, 4 out of 10 is Hall of Fame material, right? In baseball,
Right.
right? A 400 average is Hall of Fame material. So the biggest thing that I see a lot of leaders kind of struggle with is that fear of failure, right? What
Right.
is it going to look like? That fear of failure, and so what that does is it paralyzes them in terms of making when it comes to tough decisions.
Agree.
I think that's when true leaders actually shine, right? When you have to make that tough decision, when you're going to have to, like, when everybody else is looking to you to say what decision are you going to make, like, are you able to kind of step up and do that, right? And I think that is critical. That live before you die is it gives you those lessons to kind of go drive that. And how it's influenced me is um, I, rule number one: if there's a decision to be made, I will absolutely, and if that decision is this thing, I'll absolutely make it, and that will end up, I'll own it, right?
Right.
If it's this, I'll get up and. But number two is more of the how, as I said, like the what, make the decision you're going to do, but the how is more important. Tying it back to the Simon Sinek thing, I think it's important when it comes to tough decisions that a leader who has to make the decision has to take at least 2 to 3 steps back to look at it as an observer, right?
Okay.
You've got to be able to listen to the other points of view, like what's doing that, and it just comes down to making the best choice or the least acceptable or the most of the least acceptable choices, right? Like that's kind
Right.
of what it comes down to. But if you can't do that, if you end up being vested in the decision, if you're
Hmm.
actively involved, then your decision is going to be, clouded by your own biases and others. So I think when
Well
there's
said.
tough decisions, you have to kind of step back and let the process take the how piece of it is important. And I
Right.
think back to I'm telling you, empathy, curiosity, growth mindset, right? Those three skills, I say you can apply it to this thing. Empathy, you're listening to all points of view, genuinely listening to all, points of view that's being made.
Right.
Curiosity, there's going to be things that you don't understand. You got to be able to ask the questions behind that piece, and the context is important. And then
Hmm.
being able to take that growth mindset to say, I get it, right? Like it's none of these decisions is palatable. I wish there was option four, but I don't. Right? And I got to be able to make option. One of these three work. Make the call and own it. Right? Own
Right.
it. And if it's the wrong one, learn from it very quickly. Like retrospectives are a big thing for me. When we failed, like we responded, as an example, we responded very, very well to the whole incident from Friday, right? Like, from
Right.
the CrowdStrike piece from Friday. The first thing you do on Monday is retrospective, right? Okay, you got everything back in retrospective. What worked, what did not work,
Well
and
said.
we had things that like we wished worked better, like, and so hopefully we don't have to do it another time. But if we have to do that, like, you'll be ready to go do that. So it's. I think that's the big thing that I learned from that whole Steve Jobs philosophy, which is like, be bold, be brave, take the call. Um,
Hmm.
everything that he said, like, I use the one, make a dent in the universe. The other piece that I love about him is, like, I'm not building what customers want. I want to build things that customers don't even know they need. Right?
Right.
The
I,
whole
I agree,
design
man.
thinking
I love that
concept.
too.
It's like, that
The thing
that
that
is.
really Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say the thing that really resonates with me is, as much as you espouse the idea of being bold and making tough decisions and owning the decisions and owning those outcomes, you balance that out with this whole notion of listening and empathizing and relying on your team, relying on the input from others and listening to them and realizing, having the introspection to be able to realize that I'm going to be prone to my own biases,
Mhm.
and by including others in this decision making, or at least getting those data points, it helps to broaden my perspective to help me make sure that I'm making a wise decision. Because
Yeah.
sometimes the decisions are high stakes, and sometimes we have imperfect data, and we have to make a decision, and we have to stand by that decision. So when you think about your team, obviously I imagine you put a lot of effort into making sure that you've got the right people in the right jobs. So when it comes to like cultivating talent, what methods do you use to identify and nurture potential in your team?
Yeah. Um, Again, another great question. And my style has changed completely, right? Like, so if you, there's several people who still work for me who started with me at Nationwide, right? Who still like keep
Hmm.
following me, did different roles and others. And but the person that they saw for the 12 years I was there is not the person that's standing in front of you right now. And I'm proud of it, right? Like that what hasn't changed is the passion and the drive haven't changed. But I'm like let's go take this hill. We've taken the hill. It's like cool, move on. Let's go take to the next one. Right? You're not the
Hmm.
guy who stops and smells the roses on that front because it's part of that transformative mindset that you have and do that piece.
Right.
Earlier in my career, it was like you didn't even pay attention to it. You just said keep going, right? And then if you had a team that like if you had somebody who was in the team saying, "Hey, Patrini, we got to stop and kind of do this type of thing," I'd say, like, "Why are these guys trying to slow me down? Right? Like to go do that, please."
Right.
I have learned that like part of it is like since I'd say the midpoint in my career to now, like the change that's happened is you walk in, the weaknesses are still the same, the strengths are still the same. People don't change, right? Or and sometimes, unless you really want to change some things, you're not going to change, right?
Right.
Um, but what's changed though is you look around, and I spend a lot more time. So in the earlier part of my career, if you looked at the teams that ended up reporting to me, more than 70%, 60, 70% of them were either asked to leave or rotated out very quickly within the first
Hmm.
6 to 7 months. Now, 2 years later, 80% of the original team is still intact, right?
Wow.
Like, but that comes from sharing the why, understanding the strengths of people. When I see someone, and I do have a few people on my team that are very, very good at recognizing people, you just kind of delegate it and go like, look, I am not going to be the guy who identifies the opportunities to recognize it, but every meeting, feel free to bring it up and say, Srini, we need to do a celebration on this stuff. And others are like, I'll leverage you for it. So it's if you think about it, it's a diversity of thought on the team.
Right.
It is diversity of how you operate on it, and that's kind of what you build with the team after all of the experience that you talked about.
So you brought up the concept of diversity,
Yeah.
and I'm curious. There's not that. When you think about the strongest teams, the highest
Hmm.
performing teams are those teams that are the most diverse
Hmm.
and the most, I would say, the most inclusive. What
Yeah.
practical steps do you take to ensure diversity and inclusion within your teams?
Well, I think it is extremely important. I know in some circles, like the whole concept of DEI is considered a negative thing, and others like my whole thing is like if you've spent time building high performing teams, then you recognize that diversity of thought is important because if everyone
Right.
thinks the same, you're going to have a dictatorship. You're going to have something that may have one or two successes, but it's not sustainable.
Right.
Um, Diversity of thought is important because you need people who can speak their mind, can bring different perspectives to the table.
Yeah.
And when you think about how different perspectives are generated and how different perspectives are developed, it comes from having different backgrounds.
Yeah.
It comes from if I worked for an insurance company, hiring somebody who was not worked in insurance, that's diversity of thought. If I
Right.
if I am running a global team and I've got 200 people in India, um, having a leader in the US, like manage that entire team doesn't give you the entire diversity. It doesn't matter if they're Indian or not. Like, you don't live there. You don't have the same context that they do. You don't have to get into the same traffic they do to get into work, right?
Very
And
true.
so having diverse perspectives on a team makes the team much stronger.
Hmm.
And in order to get those diverse perspectives, you have to take specific actions around this piece. Like, we had a team in India. We have a team in India that is very strong, but I took over the IT functions within Rackspace about a year ago. And first thing you notice is there's no senior leaders there.
Mm.
So what do? We went back in, we've hired a couple of senior leaders, we've kind of taken them and put them into the management chain, right? And said, okay, so your job is to make sure that, like, that whatever we're talking about is like the team there understands it, buys into the mission and other types of things, right? Because we
Right.
may talk around and like we've all listened to the same Simon Sinek and others, but they may have never heard of them, right? And so you got to establish that common language, you got to
I love
establish
it.
that common purpose.
Well, and to your point, you talk a lot about the important qualities of listening and
Yeah,
empathizing, and creating a growth mindset from a leadership perspective. And you need to make sure that the right leaders are in the right place who are best equipped to be able to empathize
right.
and to really understand the breadth of the life experiences
Hmm.
that the diverse folks in your team
Yeah.
have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that I think
that makes a lot of
when you
sense.
approach inclusion and diversity from that vantage point, you're only going to build fantastic teams, right? There's no specific quota you're trying to fill or something like that. It happens automatically, right? Like
Right, right.
and the organizations are better for it.
Totally agree. So we've talked a lot about personal and professional development, talked a lot about leadership, your philosophy, your life philosophy. This has been very, very enriching. I know you're very, very passionate about technology. You mind if we transition a little bit and
Sure,
talk a little bit of tech?
sure.
So let's start with emerging tech. It's something I'm very passionate about. I know you're very passionate about. How do you see emerging technology shaping the world in the next 5 to 10 years, and maybe discuss specific technologies that might revolutionize things like sustainability practices and reflecting your commitment to responsible AI.
Yeah. Um, well, I think emerging technology is such a broad thing, right? Like, so I
True.
follow tech. If I start from there, if I follow tech from a sustainability standpoint, and I'm excited about a lot of the sustainability the techniques that are emerging, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, reusable plastics, better recycling techniques. Again, we've got the mess that we do have, right, with the plastics and water pollution and other types of things. Like, you can complain about it, blame it on previous generations and others, or start looking at ways to kind of solve the mess that we're in right now. And I think those technologies I'm excited to see, because if you kind of think about tech is evolving in all of these spaces. Sustainability. I'll come to IT and AI, but in sustainability, there's so much great technology that's coming in, where the where today, if you ask me, I'd say the issue is with people's behaviors, right? It's not with the tech,
Hmm.
right? So I do this all the time.
Agreed.
It's like, if you look around, I got like six bulbs going on here, but all of them are LED bulbs. It was
Hmm.
a very we bought the house, we came in, went through the whole thing, like 65, 70 bulbs, like, a ton of money, just changing the LED bulbs, right? And
There you go.
then we changed out the switches so that when I would leave the room, it automatically shuts it off, right? Like, again, you why do I bring that up? I think the tech already existed. The LED tech, all of that stuff already existed. It was the human behavior that needed to change, right?
Right.
The more that you understand and the more that you can actually change that, it's better. And I think it's the
Hmm.
same thing with IT and sustainability, right? Greener technology already exists today. Greener technology already exists today to build better things, whether it's cloud computing and how you leverage cloud. Um, but in order to do that, I know you and I have talked about it in the past. You've got to take sustainability and make it a non-functional requirement for IT.
Right.
We talk
Well
about
said.
security, availability, everything else as non-functional requirements, and how you architect systems to do that. Sustainability should be a non-functional requirement, and you can do that
Totally agree.
starting today, right? and
Right.
and that starts to guide architectural decisions back to human behavior and how do you leverage the tech, because you have to trust that the tech is going to keep evolving as long as there's people using it, right? Because
Hmm.
it's the capitalistic society, like, when you see people using it, more is going to go into it, and then you're going to drive that piece,
Right.
right? So I think that's important.
Well, and
When it
the
comes to
example
AI,
that
the
you
same.
gave, the
Yeah,
example that you
go ahead.
gave was interesting. You said you went throughout your house, you changed all the light bulbs and so forth, but then also installed technology to automate the turning off of
Yeah,
lights when you leave the
yeah,
room. So when you
right,
think about, the same thing applies in tech as well, whether it's cloud computing or artificial intelligence, whatever, automation, because at the end of the day, we're still human, we're still fallible, we're still going to make
yeah,
mistakes. You're
yeah,
you've got daughters at home, you've got a wife, you've got kids. Same thing here. You can't expect to instill a rule in your house that, okay, when you leave a room, shut the light
yeah,
off.
yeah,
I mean, it'll work some of the time. It's not going to work all the time.
right.
Automation, when done right, works every time.
That's a fantastic point, right? Like, and again, the equivalent of that, in cloud computing is like, number one, I can make a choice to take a workload and move it into the cloud, right? And
Right.
by the way, that itself is maybe a good choice, because first of all, more efficient data centers, more cleaner power sources, all of that other stuff. That's a good choice in the first place.
Mhm.
But then, for a development team to say, like, look, Saturday, Sundays we don't work, so shut it down before you go, right? Shut down our environments before you go. That is automation, right? And that's kind of what we have done. I think, yeah, it's spot on. This is why, like, I think it's important that we trust the tech and essentially be able to um, do things that take advantage of what we've already got today, right? And
Mhm.
that's the same thing I would say on when it gets to AI, right?
Yeah.
And one of the tenets, like when we launched Responsible AI, we said it needs to do three things, right? Three things. First of
Mhm.
all, for AI to be responsible, it needs to exist symbiotically with human beings, right? Because if I'm building AI to replace human beings, then it's like, what's the point, right? Like, at some point, then what do human beings do and other types of things? So it has to coexist, right? Symbiotic with human beings. That's the first S. The second one is it has to be safe and secure, right? Because
Okay.
if you're going to put something in, if it doesn't take care of the safety, the security of the individual, then it's not responsible, right? And so it's
Very
number
true.
two. And then number three is that the third S is sustainable, right? And sustainable to me is if you actually build solutions that drive income inequality even farther. If you actually build solutions that, again, I know this, and like, it's for public information already. I'm one of those guys, like, in responsible AI. If we get a chance, if we've had a couple of opportunities to go after deals for cryptocurrency companies, I've
Mhm.
said no. Right? That's not a value judgment on whether crypto is going to be relevant in the future or not.
Mhm.
It's more of, if AI is going to consume this much power, do we use it for the good of this, or do we actually go out and use it for things that may benefit as a smaller segment of the people? And the answer is no, right? Like, and so the responsible AI component of it is a big part of figuring out, because if you just take it at face value, AI is power hungry. It's a
Mhm.
net new add to the whole thing. It's not green at all, right? To do that, but if
Very
you can
true.
do it in such a way that it actually balances, helps humanity, helps, like, sustain economic viability and those types of things, then I think you get to the right place. So it's always a I'm a huge believer in tech, and I think tech is always going to be there to solve something. And if it's not there today, give it another 3 months, it'll be there. Right?
Right.
So
I'm with you, man.
assume that that's going to happen. The question is, how do you use it?
Right.
Right? And
So, and so the interesting thing, and I've been wanting to pull this thread. So when we were talking automation and sustainability and so forth, you used the phrase "trust the technology,"
yeah.
and I agree with you. Now, when we're talking artificial intelligence, do you trust that technology?
I trust the tech. I don't trust the people who created it.
Very
There's
well
a
said.
distinction. Yeah, there's a distinction, right? The tech is going to do, see, at the core of it, it's still the same neural networks that are built. It's going to learn different things. It's a question of how it has been trained. So I don't trust the people who trained it. It's very important. And
Right.
that you and I have talked in the past, like I said, like, look, it's very important that for an organization to make sure that the people that you're working with on AI share your values,
Hmm.
um, share your values as an organization, as a company, and those things, because I think that's the biggest thing that can get you into trouble. Because if you
Right.
blindly go and pick something, and I've also been one of the first to kind of talk about, you've got to start thinking of AI as a coworker and an employee in your
Agreed.
organization. And why is that important? When I hire an employee today, Sean, what do? I go do background checks, right?
Hmm.
These days, depending on the state, you don't do drug tests, but you did background tests, you did drug tests, you did all of those things, because you're bringing somebody into the fabric of an
Right.
organization, and you want
Yep.
to make sure that that individual, uh, fits in with the culture. And it's why you
Right.
do all those interviews and others.
Yeah. And to your
You got to treat
point,
AI
you know,
the
when it,
same way.
when,
You got to treat AI yeah. If no judgment here. I'm just saying, if you're saying I want to bring in Microsoft Copilot, right? So all I'm asking is, like, just make sure that you vetted it like you're bringing an employee in. It's not just a pure technology decision
mhm.
of it's going to cost me $30 per person per month. That
Yeah.
is important, but what is it going to be used for? What data is it trained on? What you know?
Precisely.
Yeah,
And
what model?
that's what I
Yeah,
was gonna probe on for
yeah.
those enterprises and those companies that are working to bring AI into
Hmm.
their ecosystem. And they're doing it through this responsible lens of
Yeah.
thinking about it in terms of, hey, I'm bringing this as an like another piece of my workforce is
Hmm.
this AI capability. I'm of the opinion, and challenge me and correct me, but I'm
Yeah.
of the opinion when it comes to this technology, the technology is moving so quickly, and the regulators are not keeping up.
Hmm.
And what's happened is we now have all of these models, thousands of models that have been trained on data. And these models, let's talk about OpenAI's model, ChatGPT. These model or whatever, they've been trained on data, and these models are proprietary, but we have no transparency into what data they've been trained on, what biases, what sort of misinformation, discrimination, etc., are in those data sets. And I know that they talk about some of the things that they do in terms of fine tuning and so forth to try to eliminate those biases. But to your point, how do you accurately vet an AI to make sure that what you're bringing in is what is being advertised when all of the most popular models are proprietary in nature, and you really have no transparency into the data sets that they were trained on.
It's a question that you wrestle with every single day. Like, I'm not pushing back on it. I think absolutely you're thinking about it the right way. Um, and just like with everything else, you're not going to have black and white answers. But here's what I'd say. Like, one of the benefits of open source versus closed source is you actually know what data it's getting trained on. That is definitely one of the controls you got to kind of think about when you're bringing
Mm-hmm.
in, when you're thinking of bringing in. Like, first of all, you always start with the why. Why are you trying to do AI? Like, I mean, we can get past the board wanted to see a demo, like, got it done. But again, now why are we trying to do AI, right?
Right, right.
Within the
It always
organization.
goes back to why.
Yeah. You go through that piece, but once you get there, I think the how matters. The how, like, the reality is, you want to make sure that you leverage something that is that has been trained using data that, like, they're very visible and open with you as to what's being trained. And again,
Hmm.
without mentioning names, some things are classified under open, but when you look at the way they train it, it's really not open, right?
True.
And there are others that are open. They'll tell you what data it's being trained on. But I
Right.
think that's only step one. Step two, you actually mentioned this. I think this is where the whole buy versus build is going to keep evolving, because how far up that chain do you want to trust an outside person to be able to do that piece versus what you do? So, am I going to build my own enterprise inference? Because everything you're talking about with fine tuning and prompt engineering and others that I can do to kind of make sure that I eliminate the biases on that front, like, and build that, is something you can build within your enterprise inference. right? You're
Hmm.
still leveraging an open source model on the outside, but my enterprise inference is built and fine tuned to the point where it is reflecting who I am and who we are as an organization, right? And you could do that, right? And but in order to do that, it comes back to like it's just surprising how everything comes back to it's well architected solutions, right? If you're just
I'm
going to
with you.
run through and put that in place, um, just imagine if you're using a large language model as prevalently as like CrowdStrike was deployed, and something bad happens in that space, right? In terms of answer, like there's injection of the thing to the model where it starts to spit out wrong answers, and you're completely dependent on that.
Yep.
It the whole enterprise risk landscape changes, right? So I think that uh, for me to tie it back from a tech standpoint, what's exciting about the tech is what's good and what's not. Like, but advocating and being one of those guys who was fighting on the good guys' side to
Hmm.
implement it, right? Not run away from it. Because I think I've said this to in public forums as well. The only thing that's guaranteed if you kind of like sulk away from all of if everyone says like all of this fake images and everything else that are coming out, like all the doomsday scenario. The only thing we can guarantee if we kind of stop is like the bad guys will win because they're not
Right.
stopping. They're
This is
not
true.
stopping. They're actually using all of this technology. They're evolving in others, and unless you have enough people on the responsible AI side pushing it in
Yep.
the right direction, the the bad guys are always going to be a step ahead, right?
There you
And
go.
so yeah, that's the reason to kind of do this. It's the reason to
Yeah.
that you get smart people recruited into the mission so that we are building the future that we want to live in.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
And it all comes back to, the technology is going to continue to evolve.
yeah,
And, as you've said over and over again, engage,
yeah,
be a leader, make sure that we have crystal clarity in terms of the why.
yeah,
And, presumably your why is always going to be born out of making the world a better place
yeah.
for our kids, for the
Doing my
world,
part,
for the
right? Like doing
environment.
my part, right? Like not
There you
not
go.
no illusions of grandeur, but if you can
Right.
take a moral path towards doing the right things based on your values, then I think you've done the best you can, right? And
I'm with you.
and hopefully you inspire other people to kind of follow, and so you have something that is tangible.
I love it. So as you think about how AI is going to undoubtedly and is already reshaping the workplace, how do you envision these changes sort of affecting day-to-day operations and
Yeah,
employee interactions into the future, into an
yeah.
AI enabled future?
So I think here's the thing. Organizations and leaders may not be ready, but AI today and the technology and not just talking generative AI, but AI in general, the AI models and others that you can build on your own, whether it's classification algorithms or any of these things,
Hmm.
um, it is good enough for them for AI to be embedded into your business process. It's good enough for it to be embedded, like in a very responsible way, right? But it's good enough because here's what I say, and again, this is not meant negative. AI is available 24/7, never
Hmm.
sleeps, right? And it is going to kind of, even if you say it's the 2% of the time it's hallucinating, that's
Right.
98% accuracy,
This is
which
true.
most human beings can't deliver 98% accuracy, right? So
Yep.
let's just take a very the direct view of it and say like that's what AI, that's where AI is today. So it needs to
Hmm.
get embedded into this. So the question is, like, are you going to fight it, or are you going to figure out a way to kind of move up that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? In
Hmm.
terms of not do the food, shelter, clothing, can I actually move into that space? And I
Right.
think that is where I we've spent a lot of time training AI. We got to spend a lot of time training humans to use AI, right? To
Good
use
point.
and especially in enterprises. I love what you guys did at Grange. Like that you were walking me through the workshops that you did. Like that was phenomenal. I still tell people that like oh Sean did this piece. I think we should like this is something. What you're doing there is you're taking something that people think is tough. It's just saying making it more familiar so that
Right.
they get more comfortable in that space. And I think we need to do a lot more of that, right? Because
Agreed.
especially in the enterprise setting, because I don't worry about, well, I do worry about it, but I don't worry about the consumer side of things because the TikToks of the world and others are embedding AI so that, like, whether the users realize it or not, they are actually using AI and they're
This is
interacting with
true.
AI every single day.
Yep.
I wish they spent more time on AI and understanding the thing. Oh, just quick sidetrack. Did you know that, like, I read and I'm tracking down the source. I read that day that a picture that you store on Instagram
Hmm.
is the equivalent of keeping a light bulb running forever. So you
Really.
take a picture of your food and
Hmm.
store it on the cloud, right?
Hmm.
Instagram, store it on the cloud, and others. The power consumption and others of that is the equivalent of running like a bulb
Wow.
for forever, right? Like, I'm tracking it down. I'll get you the source for it, but I just
Well,
read that.
and to your point, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you think about it, when you take a picture, there's power consumption in the picture and everything, but then once it
Yeah,
gets in the cloud, it's replicated all over the place. Well, I mean,
right, right,
literally, when you put something in the cloud, like it's never going to go away.
yeah, yeah,
And you're
and
right. It takes power
yeah,
and resources to store all of that information.
right, and so,
That's quite a startling
yeah. So the only
fact. Yeah.
reason I bring
Wow.
that up is I think if you get people trained, you're going to find more people who are responsible about driving that stuff, right? Like, because
Yeah.
it's, I'm not doing it as a generational thing or something. You just go sit there and it's like you see the restaurant and people taking pictures of the food that they're eating, and I sit there and go like, dude, you can come back tomorrow and see the food tomorrow, right?
This is true.
But for you, you're taking the picture and putting it into this piece, and if you
Right.
realize that, because many times these are well intentioned, good hearted people who are the same guys protesting environmental issues, right? Like, we're saying, like, you warmed up the planet and others, and what do? They take 20 selfies of the food, like, that they have after that protest
Yeah.
story and put it up there. It's like, but if you understood your personal environmental impact, then you'll take different decisions. And so with AI,
Well
it's the
said.
same thing. If you make it more familiar, if you make it more familiar, then human beings, like, I trust in their ingenuity and, like, their ability to adapt. We will find the ways to kind of coexist with AI,
Hmm.
right? And actually do so in a way that is actually very, very positive. Because who wants to get
Right.
up every day and apply patches to 200 servers?
Well, hey, I don't want to knock anybody who loves patching servers. I assume there's people out there that love doing that. But to your point, automating those kinds of processes that are prone to error and so forth, and that can, as we know from what happened last week with CrowdStrike, can cause global outages.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so when you think about that intersection between technology and the enterprise and companies and businesses, executive teams and boards of directors and so forth. What are a few key aspects of technology that you wish more business leaders and board members understood?
I think there's going to be a generational shift in leadership, right? So the last 30, 40, 50 years we've come in, most of the leaders, if you think CEOs, if you think the leaders of business units who are running these pieces, I say it in the most positive way possible. They're all maybe technology adjacent. There are a
Right,
lot
right,
more. There are a lot more adept, and they understand things like financials and numbers and things like that. Because again, it's not there. It's kind of the management system that existed all of these years, right? Because you advanced through the leadership careers, like, because you were very good at understanding the numbers, understanding how that translates into a team of how you can motivate a team of people to do more stuff. It's general management was what was very, very important for that many, many years.
right.
I think it's going to start becoming less important as AI embeds itself in this thing. What it's going to be more of is, can I be a good general manager, where and understand technology enough that now I can manage? And I tell people this: you got to get ready. If you're a leader, get ready to manage a team. If you have 10 people, of 3 AI coworkers and 7 human beings, right?
Hmm.
Uh, interpersonal interactions, right? What roles, like, so why is he doing my job, right? Like, or everything that you deal with on a regular basis, just throw AI into the middle of it, and it gets into that. And if I'm a leader who only has the traditional general management skills but doesn't understand the technology,
Yeah.
I don't think many of those guys are going to make it to the top of the rank. So yes,
Right.
there's an interim thing where you have to kind of work with boards and leaders that are. Um, I don't want to knock them. Like, I think they have. Many of them have taken the time to understand the tech, but there are many others who haven't. Right, like we're still managing to the old ways of things. I think
Yeah.
people will have to start evolving to understand technology more. I don't want them, like, we don't want them coding or doing prompt engineering or any of
Yeah,
that
but
stuff. But if you can, yeah,
being truly literate from a technology
yeah,
perspective, especially in the world of tomorrow where I mean,
yeah,
I can't even imagine how AI is going to shape the tools and the languages, like the programming languages and so forth that we use. I would imagine 5, 10 years from now, we may look back on today, or and over the past few decades, and think, wow, that was a primitive way of going about doing IT. We no longer have to worry about all of the memorizing programming languages and all of these syntactic rules and so forth for how you go about building systems. It's about leveraging AI to build systems
yeah,
that can, maybe, who knows, maybe they just speak machine language. We don't need
yeah,
to worry about
yeah,
high level languages anymore because AI takes over. To your point, I really like how you started your conversation, and you were talking about how there's a new generation of leaders that are coming, and we're going to have to, and we need to pave the way for these new leaders. And to your point, these leaders are going to have to be literate from a
yeah,
technology perspective.
yeah.
That makes a lot of
Uh,
sense.
just quickly, you can edit it out later if you want to. But another book that reminded me of it. There was a book that came out by early '80s called Innumeracy, right?
Okay,
And the basic
innumeracy.
premise, yeah, the basic premise of the book was, when you walk around and talk to people, they don't say, like, I can't read, right? Like, they're ashamed to say I can't read, and this. But however, like, you run into people who are always like, I'm not good at math,
Right.
right? So it's like, so the whole premise of the book was, why is it acceptable? Why is it not acceptable to be illiterate, but acceptable to be innumerous, the innumeracy, right? Like, that's what the book is. I,
Wow.
I just made the connection because it's the same thing that's going to be with AI, right? Like, you
Hmm.
can't
Hmm.
say that something on the outside is something that is going to be critical to everything that you do, and it's things that people are going to have to take the time to understand how to work with AI.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Um, maybe I know you're an avid traveler, Srini, and I'm just curious. Do you have any travel experiences that have profoundly affected you? And kind of going back to your theme song, "What a Wonderful World." I have to imagine you've had some pretty amazing experiences.
Yeah. You know, 68 countries and counting, right? And then
Wow.
we as a family love traveling, because I think a big part of it is just experiencing the culture, right? Like, it's just being, there's nothing like being immersed in the culture to be able to go do that piece. Being able to, this is not just going from here to a 5-star restaurant, the hotel somewhere, and just staying in the spa and driving. That it's kind of like getting out there with the people, eating where they eat, and just understanding what life looks like in those things, or history in those areas and others. And I've enjoyed that because you can see that common theme of curiosity and empathy and other things come through. Because I think the types of solutions that you kind of see getting implemented very different than what you had. Like, so, one, there's so many different places that we've enjoyed going to, but we were in Slovenia uh, 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 last May. We were in the Baltic countries and, like, went to visit Slovenia, right? Um, and we were in their capital, and what, like, it's just absolutely. Ljubljana, right? Like, and it's a very, very pretty country. Like the
Yeah.
environmental thing is great. But like I have a picture somewhere, but you walk and there's like uh, every street's got like trash cans of like 10 different colors. Like, wait a second, I've seen
Really?
green and brown. Like, what's all of this color? And you can actually go see how they actually separate it and how their trash system works. Is
Hmm.
like it sorts it at that point in time, so there's nobody coming in and emptying the trash. It sorts it at that time, and it gets
Wow.
distributed. And I'm
Hmm.
looking at it saying it's a small country. It is they're doing their part to get to become carbon neutral, but the types of solutions that they've implemented, and you think about our stuff, and it's like we don't recycle where well, we recycle where we live, but like you go two neighborhoods down, they don't, because there's nobody picking up the recycling, right? So
Right.
how do you
Right. Right.
expect people to change their behavior when you don't do it? So you tend to kind of, in addition to enjoying nature, you tend to kind of look at these types of solutions and go, this is actually pretty cool, right?
Right.
Or like my favorite, the last November we were in Bhutan, right? And uh, so Bhutan's king has basically said, like, we're not going to measure like the progress of the country based on GNP, gross national
Hmm.
product. It's going to be based on gross national happiness,
Really?
right? Of the
Wow.
country, and it's
Okay.
just amazing to see the types of things. Again, they're not there yet, right? Like, there's countries like Sweden and others that rank higher on the happiness index,
Sure.
but these guys have made the pivot to say, this is what we're going to show, this is what we're going to
Hey,
talk.
hey, to your
And
point,
I know you're a big
it
fan of
starts
that.
with the why,
Yeah,
creating the context, sharing
yeah,
the vision, and then making the decisions along the way and seeing it through. I hear
right.
you. That's
You can
amazing.
yeah, you can talk about it, you can go and experience it, and like we've been blessed enough that with through our travels we can go and experience that. That's the
That's
core of
wonderful.
it.
That's wonderful. Nothing like opening your eyes,
Yeah,
then seeing. I'm privileged enough that when I was after I graduated high school, I served in the U.S. Navy for 6 years, and I got to travel. I wouldn't say I traveled the world, but I saw lots and lots of different places in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the Atlantic,
yeah,
South America. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when you're sitting down, you're eating a meal, surrounded by folks from a small town in a different country that you don't speak their language, but you can see, their culture and the food and it really is eye opening. It really is amazing. And
yeah. And yeah, this the thing is, like, you get to see these countries on news things and news
yeah.
and others, and nothing to knock the news outlets or any of that stuff, but like, look, it's a particular lens that they're showing you the country through. When
Hmm.
you're there experiencing it, you see completely different. You may see that
Couldn't agree
part that
more.
they've shown you,
Yeah.
but you see multiple things, right? And so now
Heck yeah.
your perspective is a lot more wider, and like, back to that DEI thing, it's diverse and it's inclusive, because you've kind of gone beyond your standard information bubble to go learn more.
Right. That's wonderful. Well, hey man, we probably should wrap it up. We've been going for quite a while here. I could just go all day long, man. I'm not kidding. When you think about our community and the folks that are listening, there's lots of folks out there that would aspire to following in your footsteps. What advice would you offer to those folks? Anybody that's eager to follow in your footsteps. Like when you think about the concepts we've talked about with Simon Sinek and others, and how great leaders inspire action. What kind of influence and guidance would you offer to the next generation?
Um, it's great things, and as as you know, I think in threes. I think the first thing I'd say is, there's a quote that's attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, but it's actually from one of the older scriptures. But it says, like, uh, live like you're going to die tomorrow, learn like you're going to live forever. Right? I think the first advice I'd give people is never stop learning. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to keep going back to universities to get your next degree or something like that. Just pick an area that you have a passion for and
I
keep
love it.
learning, because
Yeah.
knowledge keeps growing. And if you don't grow with it, you are left behind. right? So I think that is very important, and especially as technologists, people tend to get very comfortable, right? Like in the role they're in, everybody thinks they are a superstar, so they kind of just overuse that same skill. So first of all,
Right.
that's like, develop that passion for learning. Learn whatever, right? It doesn't have to be you have to just spend the next 6 months only on AI. Go learn it. I told you earlier, I picked up the guitar after I turned 50.
That's
Right?
right.
And so
Heck
it's
yeah.
just fun to kind of learn new things because you don't know when you will make those connections between that. I
Hmm.
think the second component of it is, um, don't let yourself become comfortable, right? Because I think it all depends, right? Again, I'll still start with the why. Why is it important to you? Like for other people, other things, and there's no wrong answer. Somebody just says, I want to enjoy every moment of my life. I want to be on the golf course playing this piece. I'm comfortable with what I have. Fantastic. You found your why, go live it, right? But I'm talking about people who are in the professional thing that they want to keep growing and driving that. I'm saying, like, look, you want to learn, you also never let yourself become comfortable, because we all work in
Yeah.
great organizations. Grains, as an example, is a great organization where
Hmm.
if you didn't want to be the CTO, you could do other roles in that space, and they would love to kind of leverage that experience.
Yep.
Most organizations I've worked in are just absolutely phenomenal that way.
Yep.
So, but that doesn't happen unless you initiate the change. If you're comfortable, like, people don't want to change the thing, you're going to have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations so that you can keep learning. So that's number two, right? And then the last component of it is, um, I'd be a lot more scared if you didn't fail. Right? So don't be afraid of failing. If
There you
somebody
go,
came to
man.
me and said, like, somebody came to me and said, "Oh, I've never failed in anything I've done," then my thing is going to, shit. Then I'm not hiring this person because their first failure is going to be on my watch, right?
It's true. So what have you done?
Or
Yeah.
yeah, or more of, it's more of like, if they haven't failed, they haven't learned more. You learn a lot more from failure, right? So
You're
I don't.
absolutely right.
I think I just tell people that don't even worry about it. Every one of us fails. Like, everybody loves to write about only the success stories. They just say, "Oh, see, Airbnb got built to something big." They don't tell you that it took 7 pivots for them to get to the model that they got to. The 7 pivots, you could call it this failure, right? They went down a
Right.
path, didn't work. Went down a second path, didn't work. But
Oh yeah.
everybody loves to write the success story. They don't like write the learning story, which is
Yeah.
typically the failure story.
That's
Right,
very
and
true.
so don't ever be afraid to kind of fail, because you learn a lot more in that space. So I think, like, look, that's we've got, just closing it out with that, we got phenomenal leaders here. There's so many people who can actually help you grow. We are lucky to live in the Central Ohio region, like the Silicon Heartland, which, listen, I'm so happy to see us get the dues, like, and even for my friends on the coast who say, Columbus, Ohio, that's Cowtown, and I go, like, please keep thinking that way, because we want to build Silicon Heartland based on our values, and learn from all of the positives of the valley, but not replicate the mistakes, right? Learn from the failures,
Yeah.
right? And make
Well,
sure we'll make our own, but don't replicate the failures from other places.
and I always say I think what our superpower out here in Columbus is our community and the collaborative culture that we've created in our community. And I got to tell you, man, um, it's due to leaders like you, Srini.
Yeah.
I've gotten so much out of this conversation today. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for being
One
here
last thing to
and
leave you with.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I,
man.
I heard this from the CEO of Rockbridge Ventures, like, here, a local investment thing. Like, because I was talking to him and I said, I don't know what it's about Columbus. Like, I keep coming back and keep bringing me back. And he said, here's the way I explain it. Columbus
Yeah.
is a place where you never stop making friends, right?
There
And
you
I want
go, man.
people who are considering this to do that, because that's the community you're talking about, right? You can go up to anyone and ask them for help, and if they can help,
Very
they'll help
true.
you. If not, they'll connect you
This is
with
true.
someone, right? It's a great
Well,
place to be.
I'm lucky to count you as a friend, and I'm honored to count you as a part of my tribe of mentors. So thank you, Srini.
Thanks.
This has been a
Thank you, man.
great conversation.
Um,
Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you out in the community, man.
Got it.
My
Thanks.
brother. Anytime, man.